You can always tell who doesn't belong here." That was the sentence Sophia Bennett heard the moment she stepped into the marble lobby of the Coral Bay Resort in Miami, her sandals dripping rainwater across the polished floor, while wealthy guests in designer suits turned to stare at her like she had wandered in by mistake. And honestly, she looked nothing like the women usually seen inside a five-star oceanfront resort charging $1,200 a night. Because Sophia wore a simple beige dress slightly damp from the storm outside, her blonde hair loosely tied back, no jewelry except a thin silver wedding band almost hidden beneath her sleeve, and in her hand was an old phone with a cracked corner that looked completely out of place beside the luxury watches and diamond bracelets surrounding her. But Sophia didn't seem embarrassed at all as she quietly walked toward the front desk with calm blue eyes, while thunder rolled outside over Biscayne Bay. And that calmness only irritated people more, especially Vanessa Moore, a social media influencer live streaming from the lobby with nearly 2 million followers. Because the moment Vanessa noticed Sophia standing near the indoor fountain, she smirked at the camera and whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Either she's lost, or this place seriously needs better security," causing several guests to laugh, while Sophia simply ignored them and asked the receptionist in a soft voice if the private marina entrance was still open despite the rain. But before the receptionist could answer, a tall man in a navy suit approached with the cold confidence of someone used to controlling every room he entered, and the gold nameplate on his jacket read Ethan Cole, General Manager, his sharp eyes moving from Sophia's wet sandals to her old phone before stopping at her face with clear suspicion. "Ma'am," he said politely, but loudly enough for nearby guests to listen. "This area is reserved for registered guests only." And Sophia calmly replied that she was waiting for her husband and only needed access to the marina for a short time. But Ethan barely let her finish before smiling in that fake professional way rich people use when they've already judged someone. "Of course," he said. "And what suite are you staying in?" For the first time, Sophia hesitated slightly before answering. "I'm not staying overnight." And that single sentence instantly changed the energy around them as nearby guests exchanged amused looks, while Vanessa quietly pointed her phone camera towards Sophia again, sensing drama, and Ethan folded his hands together with a practiced smile that somehow felt colder than the storm outside. "Then I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to leave the property," he said, while several people nearby openly stared now, waiting to see how the soaked woman in cheap sandals would react. But instead of arguing, Sophia slowly looked past the lobby windows toward the dark ocean outside, where distant lightning flashed over the water. Then she tightened her grip on the old phone and quietly asked one simple question that made Ethan frown in confusion. "What time is it exactly?" Ethan glanced at his Rolex. 6:10 p.m. Sophia nodded once, almost to herself, then looked back at him with a calm expression that strangely unsettled him despite her appearance, because her voice stayed completely steady when she softly said, "Okay, then he should be here in less than 2 hours." The moment Sophia said those words, the entire mood in the lobby shifted from curiosity to amusement, because to everyone standing there, she did not look like the wife of a man important enough to arrive at a private marina in the middle of a storm. And Vanessa Moore immediately laughed under her breath before turning her livestream camera towards Sophia again, while comments exploded across the screen from viewers mocking the lost woman at the luxury resort. But Sophia barely reacted as thunder echoed outside and rain streaked down the massive glass windows overlooking the ocean, while Ethan Cole kept his professional smile fixed in place even though irritation was clearly building behind his eyes, because people like Sophia made him uncomfortable, not because she was loud or disruptive, but because she remained strangely calm while being judged by an entire room full of wealthy strangers, and that calmness made it impossible for him to fully control the situation. "Ma'am," Ethan said carefully, "I understand you may be waiting for someone, but the marina is private property reserved for guests and approved investors only." And Sophia nodded politely, as if she already expected that answer before quietly reaching into her damp purse and pulling out a small folded piece of paper, which she slid across the marble counter toward him. But Ethan barely glanced at it before his expression hardened, because the paper was not a reservation confirmation or a guest pass like he expected. It was simply a handwritten dock number with the words "Do not delay" written beneath it in dark ink, and Ethan let out a short breath through his nose before pushing the paper back toward her. "I am going to ask you one last time to leave voluntarily," he said, while several nearby guests openly watched now like they were witnessing entertainment during dinner hour, and Vanessa stepped closer with her phone still recording as she whispered dramatically to her audience. "This is getting really awkward." But Sophia ignored the camera completely and instead looked past the lobby toward the ocean again, where the storm clouds were slowly drifting farther offshore. Then she softly asked Ethan another question that caught him off guard. "How long have you managed this resort?" Ethan blinked once, clearly confused by the question. "Almost 6 years." Sophia gave a small nod like she found that information interesting, then quietly replied, "Then you probably remember what happened to the previous owners." And for the first time since meeting her, Ethan's confident expression flickered slightly, because every executive in Miami's luxury hospitality industry knew the story of Coral Bay Resort, how the original ownership group lost nearly everything after a single failed expansion project, and how a mysterious investor quietly saved the property from bankruptcy 3 years earlier. But before Ethan could respond, Vanessa interrupted loudly with a laugh. "Oh my God, now she is pretending to know the owners too," causing another wave of chuckles around the lobby, and Ethan quickly regained control of himself. Before motioning toward the entrance where 2 security guards had just appeared near the front doors, "Escort the lady outside, please," he said calmly. But the second those words left his mouth, Sophia's old phone suddenly buzzed in her hand, and although the screen was cracked, the caller ID visible for only a brief second made Ethan's stomach tighten without understanding why, because the contact name displayed only one word: Lucas. Sophia looked down at the buzzing phone for a brief moment before answering quietly, and the second she lifted it to her ear, the noise in the lobby seemed to fade beneath the heavy sound of rain tapping against the glass walls of the resort, while Ethan Cole watched carefully, without understanding why the single name on that cracked screen suddenly bothered him so much. And Sophia spoke softly into the phone like she was talking to someone she trusted completely. "You are early," she said, then listened for several seconds before her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear, not surprise, but concern. "No," she said calmly, glancing toward Ethan and the security guard standing nearby. "Do not come angry." And that sentence alone caused a strange silence to spread through the people closest to her, because it did not sound like a desperate woman asking for help. It sounded like someone trying to prevent a problem much bigger than everyone realized. But Vanessa Moore quickly broke the tension by laughing loudly toward her livestream audience. "Okay, now this is definitely fake," she said while zooming the camera closer to Sophia's face. "She probably called an Uber driver and thinks she is in a movie," causing several guests to laugh again while comments poured across Vanessa's screen faster than she could read them. And Ethan decided he had allowed the situation to continue long enough because the attention was starting to disrupt the atmosphere of the resort during one of the busiest weekends of the summer season. So he straightened his jacket and motioned politely toward the front entrance again. "Miss Bennett," he said firmly, emphasizing her name now after seeing it briefly appear during the phone call. "You are no longer welcome inside the Coral Bay Resort tonight." And Sophia slowly lowered the phone before slipping it back into her purse with the same calm expression that had unsettled Ethan since the moment she arrived. Then she looked around the massive lobby filled with expensive watches, designer dresses, polished marble floors, and oceanfront wealth before quietly asking a question nobody expected. "Does everybody here always judge people this quickly?" For a moment, nobody answered because the question landed harder than anyone anticipated, especially with the storm outside darkening the entire lobby and flashes of blue lightning from the ocean beyond the windows. But Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically and muttered, "People judge what they see," while Ethan gave the security guards a small nod. And although the guards remained respectful, their presence made it clear Sophia had no real choice anymore. So she simply picked up her small purse and began walking toward the exit without arguing, without crying, and without showing even a trace of embarrassment despite dozens of eyes following her across the lobby. And somehow that quiet dignity made the wealthy guests more uncomfortable than if she had screamed at them, because deep down, people expected humiliation to look emotional. But Sophia carried herself like someone who already knew the ending of the story, while everyone else was still laughing at the beginning. And as the automatic glass doors opened to the storm outside, a powerful gust of ocean wind swept through the lobby, sending rainwater across the marble floor, while Sophia stepped into the dark evening alone. But just before the doors closed behind her, Ethan's assistant rushed across the lobby, holding a tablet in one trembling hand. Her face suddenly pale as she whispered something into Ethan's ear that caused all the color to slowly drain from his expression. Ethan stared at his assistant as thunder rolled across the Miami coastline again. And for the first time that evening, the confident control he carried so naturally began slipping from his face because the young assistant was visibly nervous while holding the tablet tightly against her chest. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "the marina staff just called." And Ethan frowned immediately, lowering his voice as several nearby guests continued watching with open curiosity after Sophia's removal from the lobby. "What about the marina?" he asked, but the assistant hesitated before speaking carefully. Dock 7 was cleared 30 minutes ago under executive authorization, and Ethan's expression tightened because Dock 7 was not available to ordinary visitors. It was reserved only for high-level investors, foreign dignitaries, and private arrivals approved directly through ownership channels, which made absolutely no sense considering the woman they had just escorted out looked like she could barely afford dinner inside the resort restaurant. But before Ethan could respond, Vanessa Moore stepped closer again with her live stream still running, immediately sensing drama from the tension in the manager's face. "Wait," she said excitedly, "what is happening now?" And Ethan quickly forced a smile before telling his assistant to return to the office. But the damage was already done because people nearby had started whispering among themselves while glancing toward the storm outside where Sophia had disappeared moments earlier. And despite himself, Ethan felt a growing discomfort settling into his chest because experienced managers learned to trust instinct after years in luxury hospitality. And right now his instincts were telling him something about this situation was dangerously wrong. Meanwhile, outside the resort, Sophia walked calmly through the rain toward the private marina pathway, while ocean wind pushed strands of wet blonde hair across her face. But even alone in the storm, she never once looked defeated. Instead, she moved with the quiet patience of someone waiting for an inevitable moment to arrive. And when she finally reached the covered dock area near the water, she sat down on a wooden bench facing the dark Atlantic Ocean while waves crashed softly against the pilings beneath her feet. Then she checked the time again on her old phone before typing a short message that simply read, "Please keep it peaceful." And after sending it, she slipped the phone away and looked out across the water where distant lights flickered through the storm clouds far offshore. Back inside the resort lobby, Ethan attempted to restore normalcy as guests slowly returned to conversations and dinner reservations. But Vanessa refused to let the story die because her livestream audience had nearly doubled during the confrontation, and now thousands of viewers were demanding updates about the mystery woman from the marina. So Vanessa dramatically followed Ethan toward the front desk while asking if the woman had been arrested or removed from the property permanently, causing Ethan's irritation to deepen because the last thing Coral Bay Resort needed was viral social media controversy attached to the brand, especially with a major acquisition meeting scheduled that weekend involving one of the wealthiest private investment groups in the country. And just as Ethan prepared to shut the entire situation down publicly, one of the marina security radios suddenly crackled loudly across the front desk with a voice filled with panic. "Control, this is Dock 7, the man said breathlessly. "We just received visual confirmation on the incoming vessel." And Ethan immediately grabbed the radio. "What vessel?" he demanded. But there was a long pause before the shaken voice answered with words that caused the entire color to drain from Ethan Cole's face in front of everyone standing there. "Sir, it is the Aurora Sovereign." For 3 full seconds, Ethan Cole said absolutely nothing after hearing the name Aurora Sovereign through the radio, and the silence alone was enough to make everyone near the front desk feel the atmosphere change because even guests who had never heard of the vessel immediately recognized the fear spreading across the manager's face. While Vanessa Moore lowered her phone slightly for the first time all night as confusion replaced her smug excitement. "What is that?" she asked quietly, but Ethan ignored her completely because every executive working in Miami's luxury hospitality industry knew exactly what the Aurora Sovereign was, a 300-foot superyacht owned by Lucas Bennett, the billionaire investor whose private acquisitions had quietly reshaped half the waterfront properties along the East Coast during the last decade, a man so private that most people had never even seen a clear photograph of him, yet powerful enough that entire companies changed policies the moment his legal team made a phone call. And the worst part was that Lucas Bennett had been rumored for months to be considering a full acquisition of Coral Bay Resort, which meant the entire staff had spent weeks preparing for the possibility of his arrival. But nobody expected him during a storm, and certainly nobody expected him tonight. While Ethan stood frozen at the front desk, the marina radio crackled again through the lobby speakers. "Sir," the voice said nervously, "the vessel is requesting immediate private docking clearance." And Ethan snapped back to reality before grabbing the radio harder than necessary. "Clear Dock 7 immediately," he ordered, his voice suddenly tense. "And make sure the press boats stay back." But it was already too late for privacy because several guests had moved toward the massive oceanfront windows where distant lights were now visible beyond the dark water, glowing faint blue through the rain like something enormous emerging from the storm itself. And the moment people noticed the approaching lights, whispers spread rapidly through the resort lobby, while phones came out everywhere as guests rushed to record what was happening. Meanwhile, outside, near the marina, Sophia Bennett remained seated quietly beneath the covered dock shelter while wind swept rain across the empty wooden walkway around her. But unlike the chaos building inside the resort, she looked completely at peace as she watched the distant lights slowly grow brighter across the water. And after several moments, her old phone buzzed again with another incoming call from Lucas. But this time when she answered, his voice sounded much closer, calmer, and dangerously controlled beneath the sound of helicopter blades somewhere in the distance. "Sophia," he said quietly, "look at me honestly and tell me one thing." And for the first time all evening, Sophia closed her eyes briefly before replying, "I am fine." But Lucas remained silent for several seconds before asking the question that made her heart sink slightly. "Did they embarrass you publicly?" Sophia did not answer immediately because she already knew what that silence alone would tell him. And when she finally spoke, her voice stayed soft despite the tension building around the marina. "Please remember what you promised me," she whispered. "No revenge." And Lucas let out a slow breath over the phone before replying in a calm tone somehow colder than the storm surrounding them. "Sophia, protecting you is not revenge." Then the call disconnected, and only seconds later, the deep horn of the Aurora Sovereign echoed across Biscayne Bay so powerfully that guests inside the resort lobby physically turned toward the ocean in shock as the massive silhouette of the superyacht finally emerged through the rain directly toward Coral Bay Resort. The closer the Aurora Sovereign moved toward the resort marina, the quieter the entire property became, because no photograph online could truly prepare someone for the scale of the vessel in real life. And as the massive yacht emerged fully through the rain and drifting fog, its glowing blue exterior lights reflected across the black ocean water like a floating skyline, stretching nearly the length of a football field with multiple illuminated decks rising above the harbor while crew members moved with precise coordination along the railings. And guests inside Coral Bay Resort began crowding against the oceanfront windows in complete disbelief as phones recorded every second of the arrival. While outside near the marina, employees rushed across the docks trying to prepare for a level of VIP reception the resort had not handled in years. But even among the chaos, Sophia Bennett remained seated quietly beneath the covered shelter with her hands folded calmly in her lap, her damp beige dress moving softly in the ocean wind while strands of blonde hair brushed across her face. And several marina workers glanced at her nervously now because word had already spread among the staff that the mysterious woman removed from the lobby somehow knew the owner of the approaching superyacht personally. Meanwhile, inside the resort, Ethan Cole stood near the front desk with a growing feeling of panic tightening in his chest because the situation was rapidly moving beyond anything he could control, and every minute that passed made one terrifying possibility feel more real. While Vanessa Moore still streamed everything live to her audience, even though her confident attitude had faded entirely. "Guys," She whispered to the camera while zooming toward the harbor lights. "I think this might actually be serious." And comments flooded her live stream demanding to know who the woman outside really was. But before Ethan could attempt damage control, another staff member hurried across the lobby, holding a tablet displaying updated marina clearance information. "Sir," the employee said carefully, "the vessel security team just sent their arrival protocol." Ethan took the tablet immediately, and the moment he read the first line, his stomach dropped because the instructions were addressed directly to Coral Bay Executive Management and listed one non-negotiable request in bold letters. "Prepare private access for Empress Sophia Bennett." And suddenly Ethan felt every decision he had made that evening replaying inside his head with brutal clarity. The public humiliation, the removal from the lobby, the security escort, Vanessa filming everything online while guests laughed. And for the first time in 6 years managing luxury properties, Ethan realized he may have destroyed his own career in less than 2 hours. While outside at Dock 7, powerful spotlights from the Aurora Sovereign swept across the marina as the yacht slowly completed its final approach through the rain, and moments later the sound of helicopter blades thundered across the harbor as a sleek black helicopter descended carefully onto the upper landing deck of the vessel, causing several guests watching from the resort balconies to gasp in amazement. But Sophia barely reacted, because she already knew who was arriving. And after the helicopter engines powered down, a tall man in a dark charcoal coat finally stepped out onto the illuminated deck, surrounded by security personnel who immediately kept their distance from him. Because even among billionaires, Lucas Bennett carried a reputation unlike anyone else. A man known not for public attention or celebrity appearances, but for quiet influence powerful enough to change the future of companies with a single phone call. And as Lucas stood on the deck looking toward the marina through the rain, his eyes found Sophia instantly, and the expression on his face the moment he saw her sitting alone in soaked clothes beneath the dock shelter caused every member of his security team to go completely silent. Lucas Bennett did not rush as he stepped off the helicopter platform onto the upper deck of the Aurora Sovereign. Yet somehow every movement he made carried enough authority to silence an entire marina filled with employees, security staff, and wealthy guests watching from balconies above. Because men like Lucas did not need to raise their voices or demand attention. Their presence alone changed the atmosphere around them. And as rain continued falling lightly across the harbor, 2 members of his security team immediately moved forward with umbrellas. But Lucas ignored them completely while walking toward the main boarding stairs with his eyes locked only on Sophia, sitting alone beneath the dock shelter. And for several seconds nobody spoke, because even from a distance, the emotional contrast between them was impossible to ignore. The billionaire arriving from a glowing superyacht large enough to dominate the entire harbor, while the woman waiting for him sat quietly in soaked sandals with an old cracked phone resting in her hands. And yet somehow, despite all the wealth surrounding Lucas, Sophia still looked like the center of his world the moment he saw her. Meanwhile, inside Coral Bay Resort, Ethan Cole moved quickly through the lobby toward the marina entrance with panic building beneath his carefully controlled expression, because resort staff were now receiving direct instructions from Lucas Bennett's executive office, and every message made the situation worse. Private legal representatives were requesting incident reports, security footage preservation orders had already been issued, and someone from Lucas's corporate team had even requested the names of every employee involved in Sophia's removal from the property, which meant this was no longer a misunderstanding that could disappear quietly overnight. While behind Ethan, Vanessa Moore continued following the situation in complete disbelief. Her livestream audience now exploding into the hundreds of thousands as viewers realized they were witnessing something real instead of staged internet drama. And for the first time since starting her livestream career, Vanessa no longer looked amused because deep down she understood she had publicly mocked the wife of one of the most powerful private investors in America in front of millions of viewers. Outside at Dock 7, Lucas finally reached the bottom of the boarding stairs and stepped onto the wet marina walkway as security personnel maintained distance behind him. And the moment Sophia stood up to face him, the tension surrounding the harbor shifted instantly because Lucas's cold expression softened the second he looked directly into her eyes. Then, without saying a single word at first, he removed his charcoal coat and gently placed it around her shoulders while rainwater still dripped softly from her hair, and several nearby employees quietly looked away because the intimacy of the moment felt strangely personal despite the enormous crowd watching from a distance. But after a few seconds, Lucas finally spoke in a calm voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "Did you wait long?" And Sophia gave a small smile before shaking her head lightly. "Not really," she answered. But Lucas looked down briefly at the wet sleeves of her dress and the redness in her hands from sitting in the cold rain, and something inside his expression darkened again as his eyes slowly lifted toward the glowing resort behind them, where dozens of guests still watched from the windows. Then he asked the question that made several nearby marina employees immediately tense with fear. "Who asked my wife to leave this property?" And although his voice never rose above calm conversation, the silence that followed somehow felt heavier than shouting, because everyone standing near Dock 7 suddenly understood one terrifying truth at the exact same moment. Lucas Bennett had not come to Coral Bay Resort for business tonight anymore. The question Lucas Bennett asked spread through the marina faster than the storm winds rolling across the harbor, because even though he spoke quietly, every employee standing near Dock 7 understood immediately that this moment would decide the future of more than one career tonight. And nobody moved for several long seconds as rain tapped softly against the wooden dock beneath their feet, while Sophia gently held the edges of Lucas's coat around her shoulders and looked up at him with calm eyes that seemed more concerned about his reaction than her own humiliation. "Lucas," she said softly, trying to ease the tension growing around them. "It is over now." But Lucas did not look away from the resort towering behind them, with glowing balcony lights reflecting across the wet marina, and the controlled stillness in his expression somehow felt more intimidating than anger ever could, because men who truly held power rarely needed emotional outbursts to make themselves understood. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole finally emerged from the marina entrance with several senior staff members rushing behind him. And the moment he saw Lucas standing beside Sophia near the dock, the last remaining hope inside him disappeared completely, because there was no longer any doubt. The woman he publicly removed from Coral Bay Resort was not a random visitor. She was Sophia Bennett, wife of the billionaire investor his company had spent months desperately trying to impress, and suddenly every mistake Ethan made that evening felt impossible to escape. While nearby guests gathered along the waterfront balconies in silence as phones recorded everything unfolding below, and Vanessa Moore, still live-streaming despite visibly shaking hands, whispered to her audience, "Oh my God." She was telling the truth the entire time. But nobody paid attention to the influencer anymore, because all focus remained on Lucas as Ethan slowly approached the dock with forced professionalism barely holding together beneath the panic in his face. "Mr. Bennett," Ethan began carefully, "I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding earlier this evening." But Lucas turned toward him before he could continue, and the look in his eyes immediately stopped Ethan mid-sentence because there was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only disappointment so cold and controlled that it somehow felt worse. Then Lucas asked one simple question. "Did you know who she was when you removed her?" Ethan swallowed hard before answering honestly, "No, sir." And Lucas nodded once very slowly as if that answer confirmed exactly what he already suspected. "That is the problem," he replied quietly, then glanced briefly toward the resort balconies where wealthy guests still watched the scene unfold. "You believed respect should be earned through appearance." And Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself. But no words came because deep down he knew the accusation was true, while Sophia gently touched Lucas's arm as though asking him silently not to go further. But before anyone could speak again, Vanessa suddenly stepped forward from the crowd, holding her phone lowered now for the first time all night. Her confident social media persona completely gone as guilt replaced the excitement she carried earlier. "Mrs. Bennett," she said nervously, "I think I owe you an apology too." And several nearby guests immediately looked uncomfortable because they remembered laughing along with her only hours earlier. But Sophia surprised everyone by offering Vanessa a small, tired smile instead of anger. "You only judged what you thought you saw," she answered softly. Then her eyes drifted back toward the glowing resort behind them. "Most people do." And that quiet response somehow embarrassed the crowd more than any public revenge ever could, because in that moment, The woman they mocked in soaked sandals showed more dignity than everyone who had looked down on her all evening. The rain finally began slowing over Coral Bay Resort, as if even the storm itself had grown quiet after everything that unfolded at Dock 7. And for several moments nobody moved because the emotional weight hanging over the marina felt impossible to ignore, while Sophia Bennett stood beside Lucas wrapped in his charcoal coat, as ocean wind moved softly through her damp blonde hair. And across the waterfront balconies, wealthy guests who had laughed at her earlier now avoided eye contact completely because the elegant woman they dismissed as unimportant had revealed something far more powerful than money. She carried the kind of quiet dignity that could not be purchased. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole remained standing near the dock with the exhausted expression of a man realizing his entire future had changed in a single evening. And before he could attempt another apology, one of Lucas Bennett's legal advisors approached carrying a black folder protected beneath an umbrella, then calmly handed several documents to Ethan without emotion. Effective immediately, the advisor said professionally, "All acquisition discussions regarding Coral Bay Resort have been suspended pending executive review." And the words hit harder than any public humiliation ever could because Ethan instantly understood what they meant. The biggest business opportunity of his career was gone, not because of financial failure, but because he failed the simplest test of character imaginable. While behind him, senior staff members exchanged nervous looks knowing the consequences would spread far beyond one manager alone. And several guests quietly began leaving the balconies now that the excitement had turned painfully uncomfortable. But Vanessa Moore stayed frozen near the marina entrance, holding her phone lowered at her side because her live stream viewers had witnessed everything in real time. The mocking laughter, the judgment, the arrival of the yacht, and now the complete reversal unfolding in front of millions online. And for once in her social media career, Vanessa no longer cared about views or viral clips because embarrassment sat heavily in her chest after realizing how quickly she had treated another person as entertainment simply because of appearance. Meanwhile, Lucas finally turned away from Ethan and looked back towards Sophia with a much softer expression than anyone else had seen from him all evening. "Are you cold?" he asked quietly, and Sophia smiled faintly before shaking her head. "I just want to go home," she answered. Then Lucas gently took her hand before leading her slowly toward the illuminated boarding bridge connecting the marina to the Aurora Sovereign. And as they walked together across the dock, every employee, guest, and security guard instinctively stepped aside to clear a path, without being asked, not out of fear alone, but out of respect they now understood should have been shown from the beginning. And just before Sophia stepped onto the boarding bridge, she paused briefly and looked back one final time toward the massive resort glowing behind the harbor, where only hours earlier strangers had judged her worth based on wet sandals, simple clothing, and an old cracked phone. Then she quietly spoke words that nobody standing there would ever forget. "The way people treat someone with no status says more about them than the person they judge." And after that, Sophia turned away without another word as Lucas guided her aboard the superyacht, while soft blue lights reflected across the calm dark water surrounding the marina. Then moments later, the Aurora Sovereign slowly pulled away from Dock 7 beneath the Miami skyline, leaving behind a silent resort full of people forced to confront the same uncomfortable truth all at once. They had mistaken simplicity for weakness and kindness for insignificance, until the moment power arrived looking for the woman they failed to respect.